This July, I was lucky enough to travel with my parents and some other folks to Turkey. And towards the end of our stay there, my family and I found ourselves in Istanbul with a free Sunday morning. Now, as you know, I'm a seminarian studying for the ordained ministry, and you may not know, but my father is also an ordained minister. And here we are in Istanbul, formerly Constantinople, formerly the capital of the Christian Roman Empire, and still to this day the home of the Patriarchate of the Greek Orthodox Church. Of course, my family and I are not Greek Orthodox, but then again, one hardly has to be Catholic to appreciate a Mass at St. Peter's in Rome. So, that morning we approached our guide for the trip, and we asked him if he could help us find a Greek Orthodox church to attend. The guide looked worried for us. He warned us, "Do you know it is 2.5 hours long? Do you know that it is all in Greek? Do you want to attend the whole service?" We assured him that we did indeed want to attend the service, the whole service, and he brought us the next morning to the church. Now, the church is located on the European side of the city in a small neighborhood where most of the active churches in Istanbul are located. There are few churches that remain in Istanbul, and of those that are still active, many are gathered on this one street, and often they are cut off from the outside with fences and barbed wire. So we passed through the fence that morning, through the barbed wire, and into the massive cathedral. And the building was beautiful from the outside, but inside, it was incredible. The walls were decorated with massive icons, paintings of the saints, and mosaics, and they reached up to a dome that seemed to hang over the building, with a picture of Christ painted looking down and his 12 apostles all around him. And as we gawked at the architecture, we made our way to the pews, and we took our seats among the grand total of 6 other people who were present that morning. While the architecture was incredible, it was nothing compared to the service. See, the service begins with 20 young men dressed in black singing in Greek back and forth to one another. In fact, the entire service really is in Greek, and it is all sung or chanted. There's not a word spoken. After 20 minutes or so, an older gentleman with a massive gray beard stepped from behind the choir screen. He was dressed in elaborate robes, this whole costume with jewelry and hats, even a scepter. And as he walked to what could only be described as a throne, he was showered with incense by one of the men in black. Now the singing continues, and this man and 2 others dressed like him begin the elaborate rituals of preparing to hear the gospel and to celebrate the Eucharist. They parade out the gospel, holding the big red book above their heads and showering it with incense as they climb a spiral staircase to a perch about 20 feet above us, where they sing from the gospel. Next, they spend well over an hour walking back and forth behind the choir screen, being doused with incense as they carefully prepare the table and the host with every ritual you could imagine. And all the while they're doing this whole incredible show, this musical theater that is going on, there's almost nobody watching. An hour and a half into the service, and everyone that was present when we arrived has left. My family and I are the ones that have been in the service the longest, and we don't speak Greek. I don't have any idea what they're saying up there, and despite my seminary studies, I don't really have much idea what they're doing up there. I gotta confess that the whole thing, it seemed a little ridiculous to me. I mean, here they were, carefully attending to each detail, despite the fact that no one was watching. that no one was there to see. They were performing 1,000-year-old rituals in a world that had completely changed around them. The Christian empire had long since ended. The Greek population of Turkey had almost completely migrated to Greece. The population is 98% Muslim. There is virtually no one left to come to these services. Why not adapt to the present circumstances? Why not move the patriarchate to Greece? Or at least there would be people to see them perform these ancient traditions. All this change around them, so many options, and it seemed as though they were compelled by their past to carry on what seemed to be a dying and irrelevant tradition. But as the service went on, my thoughts began to change. There was something noble in their adherence to this tradition in the face of change. The idea that these men would do this whether or not anyone at all was there began to seem beautiful rather than absurd. They had made a choice to serve God, and they were going to continue to do so no matter what happened around them. And then, 2.5 hours after the service started, the men with the beards and the costumes came forward with the host. At that moment, people began to flood into the cathedral. In the last 5 minutes of the service, the attendance went from 10 to well over 100, and there was a long line waiting to receive communion. Not sure, to me it seemed as though they were a little late, but they had come nevertheless. What had happened at this service was not irrelevant to them. I was taken back by it. I was a little amazed. I found that I had a similar reaction on my first reading of the text that we heard today from Joshua. See, at this point in the book of Joshua, the people of Israel have just settled in the promised land, but things are far from perfect. The Amorites and the Hittites and all of the other ites are still living among them, and the Israelites now have to decide how they will live. Will this band of escaped slaves from Egypt become a people? Will they have their own God, or will they go back to the gods they knew in Egypt? Will they decide not to become their own people, but to blend with the Amorites and to take their gods? It is a time of uncertainty, when the circumstances of God's people have drastically changed. And in this time, when his people so need to hear about their future, Joshua seems to be compelled to speak out of their past. He brings up their ancestors, Abraham and Isaac. Just like the priest in Istanbul, he seems to be stuck in the past. He seems to be clinging to ancient traditions in the face of change. But then I remembered how those people showed up at the end of that service, how what was happening there mattered to them, how what was going on in that service in Istanbul spoke to their future. And then as I reread Joshua's address to Israel, I noticed something about the God that he describes in telling of Israel's saints. The God of Abraham and Moses, the God that Joshua and his household will serve, is not compelled by the past. God leads Abraham away from his family, away from his past, to a new land, and promises him an unimaginable future. God leads the Israelites out of their past of slavery to a future of liberation. And now God will create a people from the Israelites, though they cannot yet imagine it. Although they have never lived as a free and independent people, the God that has freed them from their past will once again open to them a future that they couldn't have foreseen. The God that Joshua serves is a dynamic God, A God not constrained by the past, but a God that changes the future. Perhaps this is why the people came to that service in Istanbul. While I was busy thinking about the past, while I was sure that the days of the Greek Orthodox in Istanbul had come to an end, these priests were serving a God they believed would open up a future for them that they could not yet imagine. What those priests knew about God is true for all of us. We need not be compelled by our past. The past did happen. It was real. And for many of us, it has been painful. But living in the confines of the past will make it impossible to live into a new future. You don't have to be constrained by your past. You can let it go. God makes possible for each and every one of us a future full of possibility. God can free us from our past, and God can open to us a future that we can't yet imagine. And today, it often seems that we are compelled by the past. Our economic system has created vast disparities in wealth, high rates of unemployment, and poverty. Our political system is so divided that it often ceases to function at all. But what are we to do? I mean, we can't just discard the system of American government all over and start once again. We can't very well toss global free market capitalism out the window. I mean, after all, these are the systems that define our world. They are who we are and where we live. But right now, there's a group of people who have begun to gather across the country. In their words, they have begun to occupy. And perhaps you've heard of them. There's a particularly noisy group of them in Oakland. I'm sure you've heard of them. And it's true that these people seem to have no coherent message. It is true that they have put forward no policy plan for implementing their demands. It is even true that some of their complaints seem outrageous. Some of their proposals seem downright impossible. But these people are not compelled to act from the past. These people know the present that they live in, and they nevertheless believe that a much different future is possible. They may not know what it looks like yet, but they believe that a future they can't even imagine can come to be. Now, we may not agree with all they are doing, but when they choose not to be constrained by the past, when they choose to believe in a future as yet unknown, we must recognize that they are indeed serving God. And as for us and our families, let us do the same. Amen.